Good evening everyone and welcome to my YouTube channel. So here today we are going to be looking at what we call the scientific method. So the scientific method is simply defined as a systematic approach to a research. So this is our definition. Now the scientific method has got 5 steps. Now if we look at this, here is a simple illustration to help you understand what the scientific method is all about. So firstly, let's imagine that this is a whiteboard. So the whiteboard, then we have paper here. So we have paper that is dropped near the whiteboard. So now, with time, more paper will accumulate around the board. So now, the question that you might wonder is, how come there are papers here? So already, when you see papers near the board, you will identify that as a problem. So that is a problem to whatever thing that you are looking at. So the first step for a scientific method is for you to do an problem identification. So now when you look at this one, this is your paper. So already that is the identification of a problem to say there are papers there. So now the question is that you will now be able to do your experiments. What is causing these papers to be here? So under your experiments, you will get to realize to say, as more people write on the board, the more the number of papers increase. So the possible explanation to that is what we call people are rubbing the board with paper. Then when they rub there, they drop the paper like that. So the paper is increasing like that. So we have talked about 2 steps. The first step was identification of a problem, which was the paper that we have. The second one is where we do the experiments. The experiments we see are where if more people write on the board, the more the number of papers there. Now under the experimentation, this is where we now have different things like the actual doing of experiments or just doing experiments. The other thing that we have is just making careful observation. So while you're doing your experiment, you should be able to make careful observations so that you are able to see what is happening as you are doing your experiment. Now, when you're doing an experiment, there should be recording of information. So recording of information. It could either be information or data. Now when we look at data can either be qualitative or quantitative. So qualitative, just as the name entails, qualitative has to do with observable features. Like for example, when you look at let's say the color of something, what color is it giving you? That's a quality. So that's the qualitative aspect of data. Data can also be quantitative. So quantitative simply means to say we are looking at the figures. So when we look at our quantitative, we are looking at figures or values. Like for example, if let's say 5 people write on this board, then there will be 5 papers here. So that is the quantitative aspect. So now the qualitative has to do with the color of the board. The color of the board might be changing to whatever marker you are using. If you are using a red marker here, the color of the board is slightly changing to the color red. So that is the qualitative aspect. Now When you do that, you now come up with an hypothesis. So you now come up with an hypothesis. So the hypothesis comes under interpreting results. So under interpreting results, scientists are required to come up with an hypothesis. So an hypothesis is also called an educated guess. So by definition, an hypothesis is a tentative. So the meaning of the words tentative simply means unsure explanation to an observation. So the unsure or the tentative explanation to an observation is called an hypothesis. So remember, an hypothesis is something that you come up with which you are not fully sure whether it is true or not. So now, an hypothesis comes in to say, let's go back to our color of the board. So now, for example, we have this board. You are using a red marker like that. So each and every time you are rubbing with the red there, you may realize to say the color, let's say the color of the board changes to yellow just bit by bit. It's more like it's small traces of yellow. So what begins to happen is that when they are coming up with an hypothesis, they will say that as long as you use a red marker, when you rub, you will have some yellow color like that. However, it could be that maybe the papers are the ones that are making the boards to be yellow, and it's not necessarily the color red. So at first, the tentative, which is the unsure explanation, would be that the red, as long as you use the red color marker, when you rub, it shall be yellow. But we don't know. We only need maybe to find out to say if the paper has got more like contaminates the board by making it yellow. So that is the hypothesis view. So now remember, we have looked at a number of things. There's the there is the observation of a identification of a problem should be here. We are going to have the careful identification of the problem as our first one. The second one was performing experiments. This one involves doing of experiments, making careful observations, and recording of information. Now, when all these are done, we have come up with an hypothesis. Now, remember, when we are doing our data, there is a lot of data that is present. The data, let's look at the quantitative aspect. Numbers such as, let's say, if 4 people write, 5 pieces of paper will be found. If 6 people write, 6 pieces of paper will be found. That's the qualitative. Now, we are required to come up with a summary, which we are going to call a law. So by definition, a law is simply defined as a concise. Concise simply means straight to the point, verbal or a mathematical relationship that guides phenomena that are always the same under the same conditions. I'll explain more on that. So a law by definition is a bit lengthy, but it is very simple if you understand it. So we are saying that a law is a concise. So concise simply means straight to the point, verbal or mathematical relationship, or rather mathematical statement of a relationship between phenomena. Phenomena, we might be talking about things like the force, the mass, the acceleration. That is always the same under the same conditions. So what we simply mean is that, let's say for example, one of the mathematical relationship that we have is force should be equal to ma according to Newton's second law. So now, what this tells you is that according to this, as long as we increase force, let's just do this, you can add that So we have an increase in force will result in an increase in acceleration. So that's the mathematical relationship. Force is equal to ma means if you increase your force, the acceleration will increase. Likewise, if you reduce your force, even the acceleration will reduce like that. So according to Newton's second law, the force, as long as you increase your force, it shall increase your acceleration. So this is what we mean by a law is a concise verbal or mathematical statement of a relationship between phenomena. So phenomena we are talking about in this case, let's say the force, the mass, the acceleration, like that. That is always the same under the same conditions. That means to say if we increase, let's say, the force, under that condition the acceleration increases. If we reduce the force, the acceleration also reduces, like that. So that is basically what a law is. So now a law will just describe what is happening. So an increase in force will result in an increase in acceleration. So a law describes. We are going to understand the difference between a law and a theory. Let's talk about our theory. So what is the theory? So now remember, we were looking at our hypothesis, which is a tentative explanation to an observation. Now a theory is formed as a result of those hypotheses that survive several results become modified into a theory. So therefore a theory is true. So a theory is defined as a unifying principle that explains the body of facts and or laws that are based on them. So what we simply mean by that is that what the theory does is that it explains in such a way that it is a unifying principle of facts, meaning to say it is true. It has been tested over several results to come up with a theory. So the hypothesis will be given, which is our educated guess. It will be talked about over several results. It shall be tested. The hypothesis that will keep giving you the same result becomes modified into a theory. So that is our definition. So we are saying that a theory is a unifying principle of facts. So meaning to say those are the truths that you have found and or those laws. So a law which could be your force is equal to ma, those laws that survive many experimental validation become into a theory. So that is simply what the theory is. It's a unifying principle of facts and or those laws that are based on them. In other words, a theory just talks about the facts, the unifying body of facts, meaning to say for something to be unified, it means to say it has been tested over several results. Now, in some cases, you might come up with a theory which might be limited to the amount of equipment that you have. For example, when you look at the atomic theory of matter, a long time ago they thought that the smallest is an atom and an atom is indivisible. So now later they just discovered to say an atom even has got subatomic particles, which we are going to call the neutrons and the electrons on the shells. A long time ago, due to technology, the theory was just about how the atom is made. Without all this, it was said to be indivisible, but with time they managed to discover that they have subatomic particles. So a theory might take many years to be disproved, meaning to say it might take a lot of years just for it to not be said to be true. One of the examples of an ongoing theory is the Big Bang theory. So it is continually being tested. So that is what the theory is. Now one might wonder, if this one gives you the unifying principle of facts, you might now wonder to say, what is the difference between our law and our theory. So the theory, the way it is, the theory explains why it happens. Things happen, while a law describes. So the theory explains why things happen, while a law describes. So it shall describe. Now, when you look at how these are, like for example, when you have, let's say you have particles there. Now, when you apply heat, let's say these are gases, this begins to expand. So under the law, you will just describe to say, as long as I apply heat, the particle, the volume increases or it expands. However, when you look at your theory now, you will explain why it happens. So under the theory, you might talk about things as heat is applied, the particles gain kinetic energy, thereby moving vigorously and far apart. As a result, there is an increase in volume. So that is how the theory can be said. So this is our simplified version. So we have the observation. From the observation, one is required to come up with an hypothesis, which is our educated guess. From there, we do other experiments. After the experiments, we go back like that. We come here, we do observation. After the experiments again, hypothesis, experiment, like that. So the cycle can continue like that throughout. Now, whenever we have such data collected, we are expected to come up with a law, which is a concise or mathematical relationship that guides two or more phenomena that are always constant, constant under the same conditions. Then we also have, now whenever we come up with this, the theory and all that, or the law, we are now expected to come up with a theory model, what you will be able to say. Now the theory, from the theory, you are able to, we said that it's a unifying body of facts or unifying principle of facts. So since those are the truths, you are able to predict if you use a certain amount to give you another amount. Then from there, we could have other experiments which brings about the modification of a theory, if any. That means to say the theory might be strengthened or the addition of some things. Then we have the theory model. The cycle continues like that. Thank you very much for watching the video. Hope you would like, subscribe, and share for more.